There is a hidden truth that Epictetus discovered in a slave cell in Rome, that Hakuin unraveled in the icy monasteries of Japan, and that Lao Tzu whispered 2,500 years ago in the mountains of China. A truth so counterintuitive that it contradicts everything we've learned about conquering life. 3 masters, 3 cultures, 3 eras, but a single revelation that can forever transform how you view freedom. Have you ever noticed how our civilization has sold us a gigantic lie? That freedom means having more choices, more control, more autonomy over every aspect of our existence. Open any app on your phone, and you'll have hundreds of options. Walk into a store, and thousands of products scream for your attention. Try choosing a movie to watch, and you're paralyzed by infinite possibilities. Paradoxically, the more options we have, the more anxious, indecisive, and trapped we become. But Lao Tzu had observed something different for millennia. He saw that water, the most malleable of all substances, could overcome even the hardest stone, not through force, but through gentle persistence and the ability to always find a way. "He who knows he has enough is rich," said the sage. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, a Greek slave named Epictetus would discover for himself this same liberating truth. Welcome to Axiom Sage, where the ancient wisdom of the East meets the most pressing questions of modern life. Today we'll uncover how 3 ancient traditions converged into a revolutionary understanding of what it truly means to be free. Prepare to question everything you believed about conquest, control, and autonomy. Before we continue, I need to ask you a question that may be uncomfortable. How many times today did you feel like you were in complete control of your life? How many times did your emotions react exactly as you wanted? How many times did the day's events unfold precisely according to your plan? If you're honest with yourself, the answer is probably almost never. And that's not your fault. It's the universal human condition. We live under a collective illusion that we should be able to control the uncontrollable. We want to control traffic, other people's moods, the weather, the financial markets, people's opinions of us, even our own involuntary thoughts. Epictetus was born a slave in the 1st century AD. Imagine, from birth, he had no control over anything, not where to sleep, not what to eat, not how to spend the day. His Roman masters controlled every aspect of his physical existence. But it was precisely in this extreme condition of lack of external freedom that he discovered something extraordinary. There was a dimension of freedom that no master could touch, no chain could bind, no circumstance could destroy. On the other side of the world, around the same time, a spiritual tradition was developing that would arrive at the same conclusions through a completely different path. Zen masters in Japan developed a peculiar practice. They asked questions impossible to answer with a rational mind. Hakuin, centuries later, became famous for asking his disciples, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" It wasn't a riddle to be solved intellectually. It was an invitation to transcend one's own need for mental control. But here's what no one tells you about this quest for freedom. The more you fight for it, the more it slips away. It's like trying to hold water in your hands, or chasing your own shadow. And Lao Tzu, the oldest of the 3 masters we'll explore today, had already realized this centuries before. He taught about Wu Wei, the art of acting without forcing, of flowing without resisting, of conquering without fighting. Today you'll discover why our modern obsession with digital autonomy and infinite choice leaves us more anxious than any previous generation. I'll show you how 3 ancient traditions independently developed practical strategies for a freedom no one can take away. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why true rebellion happens not in the streets or on social media, but in the silence of your own conscience. Let's start by dismantling a belief that probably governs your life without you even realizing it. Modern Western civilization has built its entire philosophy on a simple premise. More is better. More options, more freedom, more control, more autonomy. We are constantly bombarded with messages that we need to take control of our lives, be masters of our destiny, create our own reality. But there's a real neurological problem with this approach. When your brain is presented with too many options simultaneously, it enters a state neuroscientists call choice paralysis. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, literally becomes overloaded and begins to function less efficiently. Have you ever spent 10 minutes choosing what to watch on Netflix and then given up? That's your brain crying out for help in the face of too many possibilities. Lao Tzu observed something fascinating in nature. The most powerful elements were not those that resisted the most, but those that adapted best. Nothing in the world is softer than water, but nothing surpasses it in attacking the hard and strong, he wrote in the Tao Te Ching. While the West would, millennia later, develop an obsession with control and domination, the Chinese sage had already discovered that true strength comes from the ability to yield when necessary. Epictetus, even as a slave, reached a similar conclusion through direct experience of suffering. He realized that there were two fundamental categories of human experience: what is under our control and what is not. And here comes the part that will shock you. According to Epictetus, virtually nothing is under our real control. We don't control what happens to us. We don't control what others think or do. We don't even control all our own thoughts and emotions. So what remains? You might be asking. What remains is exactly what Hakuin wanted his disciples to discover through the impossible koans. There remains a consciousness that observes, that chooses how to respond, that can find peace even in the midst of chaos. When Hakuin asked about the sound of a single hand, he was pointing to something that transcends the logic of control. The fundamental difference between Eastern wisdom and our modern approach is this: they sought freedom through detachment, we seek it through control. They found power in acceptance, we find it in resistance. They found peace in simplicity, we believe it comes from complexity. But the practical result is devastating for our generation. We've never had so much theoretical control over our lives. We can choose our career, our partner, where to live, what to eat, when to travel. And we've never been so anxious, depressed, and confused. Rates of anxiety and depression have skyrocketed precisely in societies with the most freedom of choice. This is no coincidence. Epictetus would say we suffer from a fundamental illusion about the nature of freedom. Hakuin would gently laugh at our obsession with controlling the uncontrollable. And Lao Tzu would whisper, "He who tries to control the world will fail. The world is a sacred vessel. It cannot be controlled." If you've ever felt that the more you struggle to organize your life, the more chaotic it becomes, you're beginning to understand. If you've noticed that the more options you have, the harder it is to decide, you're on the right track. Because now we're going to explore the alternative, a path pioneered by wise men millennia ago, but one that our modern culture has completely forgotten. Now I'm going to teach you something that can completely transform your relationship with anxiety and stress. Epictetus developed what he called the dichotomy of control, a mental tool so powerful that it's still used in modern cognitive therapy today. But he went beyond psychology. He created a spiritual method of liberation. Imagine 3 concentric circles. The inner circle represents what is completely under your control: your conscious choices in the present moment, your reactions to events, your values, your judgments about situations. This circle is smaller than you imagine, but it is where all your true power resides. The middle circle represents what you can influence but not fully control: your habits through repetition, your relationships through how you treat people, your health through your life choices. You can plant seeds in this area, but you can't control whether they will germinate or how they will grow. The outer circle is everything that is completely beyond your control: the past, the future, the actions of others, natural events, the economy, politics, even many of your own spontaneously arising thoughts and emotions. Epictetus realized that 90% of our suffering comes from trying to control this outer circle. But here's the revolution. When you stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable, all that energy becomes available for what really matters, the inner circle. It's like stopping trying to push against a stone wall and using that same strength to build something beautiful. Lao Tzu arrived at a similar understanding through a different approach. He observed that nature forces nothing, but achieves everything. Plants don't struggle to grow, they simply grow. Rivers don't struggle to reach the sea, they naturally flow in the right direction. The wise man does not act, but nothing is left undone, said Lao Tzu, describing the state of Wu Wei. Wu Wei isn't passivity, it's action aligned with the natural flow of things. It's like a surfer who doesn't fight the wave, but uses its force to move. When you're in Wu Wei, you act with maximum efficiency and minimum effort. Your actions flow naturally from the situation, without the interference of the ego that always wants to force results. Hakuin added another dimension to this understanding through Zen practice. He taught that our ordinary mind is always trying to grasp, categorize, and control reality. But there is another mode of consciousness, what Zen Buddhists call the original mind, that simply witnesses everything without clinging to anything. When Hakuin asked about the sound of one hand, he was forcing the rational mind to give up trying to solve everything through logic. The moment you stop trying to figure out the answer and simply stay present with the question, something opens up. You realize you don't need to understand everything to be at peace. Now I'm going to give you a practice that combines all three masters. It's what I call the 3 circles of serenity technique. First step, when you feel anxious or stressed, stop and identify the source. Ask yourself, am I trying to control something in the outer circle? 90% of the time, the answer will be yes. Step 2. Take a deep breath and practice Wu Wei. Instead of forcing a solution, ask yourself, if I were water, how would I flow around this obstacle? The answer is almost always simpler and more elegant than you imagined. Step 3. Adopt Hakuin's Zen mindset. Accept that you don't have to solve everything immediately. Some situations are like koans. They resolve themselves when you stop forcing a solution. Stay present, curious, and open. This technique works because it aligns you with thousands of years of wisdom about how the human mind truly operates. When you stop fighting the current, you discover there was always an easier way. When you stop trying to control everything, you discover a much more subtle and powerful kind of influence. Epictetus discovered this in a slave cell. Lao Tzu observed it in nature. Hakuin experienced it through decades of meditation. But you can start applying it today, in Sao Paulo traffic, in a stressful meeting, in a difficult conversation with family. There's a story Hakuin used to tell his disciples, and it perfectly illustrates what we're exploring today. A proud and temperamental samurai came to the Zen master, demanding, "Teach me about heaven and hell." Hakuin looked at him disdainfully and said, "Teach you? Look at yourself. You're rude, dirty, your sword is dull, you're a disgrace to the samurai class. I have no time to waste on people like you." The samurai was furious. He drew his sword and raised it to strike Hakuin. At that moment, the master calmly said, "This is hell." The samurai stopped, suddenly realizing that his anger had created its own torment. He lowered his sword, bowed respectfully, and thanked him for the lesson. Hakuin smiled gently. "And this is heaven." This story reveals something profound about the nature of freedom. Hell and heaven are not distant places. They are states of consciousness that we create moment by moment through our reactions. The samurai was not free while he was a slave to his anger. The moment he recognized this, he was free. Lao Tzu would have completely agreed. He taught that the wise person is not sick because he does not live in conflict with himself. Our suffering does not come from external circumstances, but from the internal resistance we create against them. When we stop resisting what is, we discover a peace that is independent of external conditions. Epictetus discovered this too. As a slave, he couldn't control anything external, but he discovered he could choose his internal attitudes. It is not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about things, he taught. The same event can be a source of suffering for one person and growth for another. The difference lies in the internal response. But here's something we'll discover in the next few minutes. There's an even deeper dimension to the freedom these three masters discovered. A freedom that transcends even the need to control our own reactions. A freedom so radical that it challenges everything our culture has taught us about success in life. Now we come to the heart of the matter. The dimension of freedom that few discover, and that can completely transform your experience of being alive. It's what the Taoists called the state of ataraxia, and the Stoics called inverted Wu Wei. It's a state where you act with complete effectiveness, but without the feeling of being the doer of those actions. I'll tell you something that may sound impossible. There's a level of human functioning where you no longer need to strive for discipline, no longer need to fight your addictions, no longer need to force yourself to be productive. Your actions flow naturally from what's needed at the moment, without internal conflict, without psychological drama, without the constant feeling of swimming against the current. Epictetus discovered this when he stopped resisting his condition as a slave. Instead of wasting energy hating his situation, he used that energy to develop a philosophy that would liberate millions of people throughout history. He realized that when you stop fighting what you can't change, you free up an extraordinary amount of energy to work on what you can. But this is just the beginning. Hakuin went even deeper. Through decades of Zen practice, he discovered that even the I that tries to be free is an illusion. There is a deeper consciousness that was never imprisoned and never needed to be freed. When you touch this dimension, the very search for freedom becomes unnecessary. Imagine a fish that spends its entire life searching for water. This is exactly what we do when we seek freedom outside of ourselves. Freedom isn't something you achieve, it's something you are. But our consumer culture has taught us to believe we are incomplete and need to acquire something to become free. Lao Tzu expressed it beautifully. He who knows others is intelligent. He who knows himself is enlightened. He who conquers others has physical strength. He who conquers himself is powerful. But what is this self that needs to be conquered? It is precisely the ego that always wants to control, to possess, to be recognized, to be right. Here is a revolutionary practice that combines all three teachings. First level, the mirror of Epictetus. For a whole day, notice how often you are disturbed by something beyond your control. Don't try to change anything, just observe. You'll find that almost all your suffering comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. Second level, the flow of Lao Tzu. Choose an activity that normally causes you stress. It could be washing dishes, driving in traffic, or giving a presentation at work. Instead of resisting or forcing it, ask yourself, how would water do this? Allow your actions to flow naturally, without rushing, without resistance, adapting to the circumstances moment by moment. Third level, Hakuin's koan. For a few minutes each day, sit quietly and ask yourself, who wants to be free? Don't try to answer intellectually. Just stay with the question until it naturally resolves itself. You may discover that what seeks freedom and what is already free are the same thing. This process is not linear. Sometimes you'll be operating at the first level, sometimes at the third. The important thing is to recognize that there are layers of freedom you never imagined possible. Each layer you discover makes life easier, not harder. I know an executive who applied these principles during one of his company's worst crises. Instead of panicking or trying to control every aspect of the situation, he first identified what was and wasn't under his control. Then, he allowed his actions to flow naturally from what was needed at each moment, without forcing results. And finally, he discovered a deep peace even in the midst of chaos, because he realized that his identity didn't depend on the company's success or failure. The result? He navigated the crisis with more clarity and effectiveness than ever before, but without the emotional toll that would normally accompany such a situation. His employees commented that they had never seen him so calm and focused, and the company not only survived, but became stronger. Let's now integrate everything we've explored and understand why this approach is so different from everything our culture teaches us about success and achievement. The fundamental difference lies in the direction of the pursuit. Instead of trying to add more control to your life, you learn to remove the illusion of control. Think of the difference between trying to stop the ocean waves and learning to surf. Our cultural approach is like trying to stop the waves, an impossible battle that only leads to frustration. The Three Masters approach is like learning to surf, using the natural force of circumstances to move with grace and efficiency. Epictetus expressed this through a simple but powerful metaphor. You are an actor in a play. Your job is to play well the role you have been given, but you have chosen neither the script, nor the director, nor the other actors. This perspective frees you from the impossible need to control the entire production. But here's what he didn't explicitly say, and what Hakuin and Lao Tzu added. When you stop trying to rewrite the script, you discover you have much more creative freedom within the role you've been given. The actor who accepts the script can improvise brilliantly. The actor who fights against the script only creates tension. Lao Tzu took this even further. He realized that there is a cosmic intelligence operating through everything, what he called the Tao. When you align your actions with this greater intelligence, you no longer have to struggle for things to happen. They simply happen through you. The wise man stands behind, but ends up in front. He stands to the side, but remains in the center. Hakuin added the final dimension. The realization that the seeker of alignment and that with which one seeks alignment are one and the same. There is no real separation between oneself and the flow of life. The search for connection is based on an illusion of disconnection. Now, I'll show you how this applies practically to the biggest challenges of modern life. For anxiety and stress. Instead of trying to eliminate all stressors from your life, impossible, you learn to change your relationship with stress. Epictetus teaches you to distinguish between what you can and cannot control. Lao Tzu shows you how to flow around obstacles. Hakuin reveals that the observer of stress is never truly stressed. 4 difficult relationships. Instead of trying to change other people, a losing battle, you learn to change how you respond to them. You stop taking others' actions personally. You learn to maintain your center even when others are losing theirs. Paradoxically, this often inspires positive change in others, but without you having to force anything. 4 procrastination and indiscipline. Instead of fighting your resistance, you learn to work with it. You identify which aspects of the task are within your control and focus solely on those. You allow your actions to flow naturally from what needs to be done, without internal drama. And you discover that true discipline comes from clarity, not willpower. 4 fear of death and impermanence. Instead of trying to deny the reality of death, you learn to use it as a life teacher. Epictetus practiced memento mori, reminding yourself daily that we are mortal. This doesn't generate fear, but clarity about what truly matters. Hakuin meditated in cemeteries. Lao Tzu taught that accepting death is the secret to living fully. The practical difference is dramatic. People who apply these principles report less anxiety, even in objectively stressful situations. more harmonious relationships without having to avoid conflicts, greater productivity with less effort, a sense of purpose that is not dependent on external results, ability to find peace even in difficult circumstances. But there's an important contrast I need to mention. Those who continue operating in the paradigm of total control often become more frustrated over time. The more they try to control, the more they realize they can't. The more options they have, the more paralysis they feel. The more struggle they have, the more exhaustion they accumulate. Now it's time to reveal the secret I promised at the beginning of this video. The hidden truth that connects Epictetus, Hakuin, and Lao Tzu in a revolutionary understanding of the nature of human freedom. The revelation is this: true freedom is not the absence of limitations, but the transcendence of the need for no limitations. It's not being able to do anything, but finding deep peace even when you can do nothing. It's not having total control, but discovering that you never needed control to be complete. Epictetus discovered this when he realized that his physical chains were less limiting than the mental chains he had created himself. The moment he stopped resisting his external condition, he found an inner freedom no master could touch. "No one can hurt you without your permission," he said, not as empty consolation but as an accurate description of psychological reality. Hakuin discovered through decades of practice that the I that seeks enlightenment is the same I that creates suffering. When this search dissolves, what remains was never imprisoned. The koan of the hand clapping alone points to this awareness that needs no opposing pairs to exist, neither freedom nor imprisonment, neither control nor chaos. Lao Tzu reached the same conclusion by observing nature. He saw that the most powerful elements, water, wind, emptiness, never force anything, but achieve everything. They don't fight limitations, they use them as creative opportunities. Emptiness is useful precisely because it is empty, he observed, pointing to the power that comes from the absence of resistance. The practical synthesis of these three paths is surprisingly simple. First, identify where you're wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable. This recovered energy is the foundation of all true transformation. Second, learn to act based on what's necessary in the moment, not on what your ego wants to prove or achieve. Your actions become more effective because they're aligned with reality, not fantasies of control. Third, recognize that the one who observes all these changes, your thoughts, emotions, circumstances, never changes and has never needed to be liberated. This stable awareness is your true identity. When you integrate these three levels, something extraordinary happens. You continue living your life normally, working, interacting, pursuing goals, but without the constant internal drama. You act with total commitment, but without desperate attachment to results. You care deeply about things, but without being destroyed when they don't go as planned. This is not indifference or passivity. It is action from a stable center. It is engagement without anxiety. It is care without control. It is what the three masters, each in their own way, called true freedom. I'll end by telling you something that may sound provocative, but it needs to be said. Most people will never apply what I've shared today. Not because it's difficult. In fact, it's easier than constantly struggling to control the uncontrollable. But because our culture has created a strong addiction to the drama of control and resistance. There's something addictive about believing you're the center of the universe, and that everything depends on your heroic efforts. There's a false sense of importance in carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Our society rewards this mindset with expressions like warrior, fighter, entrepreneur who never gives up. But Lao Tzu whispered a different truth. The mountain does not strive to be high. It simply is. The river does not struggle to reach the ocean. It naturally flows in the right direction. The tree does not force its fruit to ripen. It ripens when the time is right. What about you? You don't need to strive to be complete. You are already everything you need to be to find the freedom you seek. Epictetus spent decades teaching students at his school in Greece, but he never wrote a book. His words were preserved by a disciple who simply observed and recorded. He sought neither fame nor recognition. He had found something more valuable than any external reward. Hakuin lived to be 83, at a time when life expectancy was much shorter. He spent hours a day meditating, but also painted, wrote poetry, and received visitors. His freedom didn't isolate him from the world. It made him more present in it. Lao Tzu, according to legend, simply disappeared into the mountains after writing the Tao Te Ching. He didn't found an organization, didn't charge for his teachings, or create a following. He simply pointed to the moon and let each person discover it for themselves. These three men lived in completely different times and cultures, but they arrived at the same revolutionary discovery. The freedom you seek isn't somewhere in the future, achieved through more effort and control. It's here now, waiting to be recognized. The invitation I leave you is not another system to implement or a technique to master. It's an invitation to stop. Stop fighting what can't be changed. Stop forcing what can flow naturally. Stop seeking in the future what already exists in the present. When you stop seeking freedom, you discover you were never truly imprisoned. When you stop trying to control your life, it begins to flow with a grace you never imagined possible. When you stop resisting what is, you find peace in the midst of what once seemed chaotic. This isn't just a pretty concept to contemplate. It's a completely different way of living, and you can start right where you are, with what you have, being who you are. The mountain doesn't need to apologize for being a mountain. The ocean doesn't need to justify itself for being an ocean. And you don't need to become someone different to be free. If this video touched something in you, if you recognized a truth you've always known but never been able to express, then you're ready for the most important journey of your life. The journey back home, to who you always were before you learned you needed to be someone different. Subscribe to the channel because in future videos we'll explore how this understanding applies to the more specific challenges of modern life. Relationships, career, money, health. But always returning to this foundation. You are already complete. You are already free. You just need to stop looking in places where it's never been. And leave a comment telling us, which of the three perspectives, Epictetus's dichotomy of control, Lao Tzu's Wu Wei, or Hakuin's koans, resonated most with your life experience? Your answer may illuminate the path for others on the same journey. True freedom isn't earned. It's remembered. And you've just taken the first step home.